This book aims to address some of the many challenges being faced by modern economies, including things like slowing economic growth, income inequality, climate change, technological disruption, and challenges with globalization. Now, the solutions presented in the book are based on recent advancements in economic theory, and in some cases, simply a recognition of a lack of understanding or a lack of clarity relating to certain issues. For example, very little is truly understood when it comes to understanding or what causes sustained economic growth. Now, one of my favorite insights from the book has to do with the idea of raising taxes on the rich and the very popular misconception that doing so is simply about raising additional money for the government. What's interesting about this policy is it also has an unusual impact on productivity, and that's because when you make changes to tax policy, it actually influences the career choices of certain people. Now, when many people choose their career, the kinds of things that tend to guide their choices can be either intrinsic or extrinsic. So, for example, intrinsic motivators for career choice might come down to wanting to make a difference in the world, wanting to work with incredible people, wanting to build an important product. Maybe you're an entrepreneur and you want to hire and be able to work with highly talented people. Those are intrinsic motivators. Then, for example, you might have extrinsic motivators, which very commonly would be simply wanting to earn more money or to raise your status or your stature in the world. And oftentimes, these extrinsic motivators are heavily influenced by things like the highest marginal tax rate. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with marginal tax rates, the idea here is pretty simple. In fact, you've probably heard of this before, but the idea is as you earn more money, you enter different tax brackets. So for example, on your first $100,000 that you earn, you might have a tax rate of, let's say, 25%, just for round numbers' sake. But if you were to earn over $1 million, any money earned above that specific threshold could be taxed at a much higher tax rate, for example, 90%. In fact, at one point in the U.S.'s history, from 1944 to 1963, the highest marginal tax rate was above 90%. And just to be completely clear here, that percent wouldn't apply to your total income. It would only apply to the income that surpassed a specific threshold. Now, one way in which this impacts the productivity of the economy is how it affects career choices. So for example, let's take a fictional example of a brilliant mind graduating from Harvard. Well, if they know that the highest marginal tax rate is going to be at 90%, and so any money they earn, let's say over $1 million, is going to be taxed at 90%, well, they're far less likely to play it safe and take up a career in finance where they aren't necessarily contributing a great deal to the productivity of the economy, but they have the potential to earn $5 or $10 million a year. Well, if they know that most of that money is going to be taxed at 90%, then they have to rethink just how important are those extrinsic motivators versus the intrinsic motivators of taking a risk, starting an interesting venture, getting to work with interesting people, building a dream business, building a fantastic product, and perhaps building the next Apple, Google, or Microsoft of the future. Now, to make matters worse, oftentimes these kind of safe, high-paying jobs involve helping companies make short-sighted decisions where they'll go into a company and they'll cut the labor force and they'll pull investments from long-term opportunities. They'll focus almost exclusively on improving quarterly performance and quarterly profits, usually at the detriment to the long-term potential of the company. And so they come in, they make a small fortune by just cutting costs left and right and sacking a bunch of workers, and then eventually the company fails or fails to keep up with changes in the economy because of these changes, because of these cuts, because of a lack of long-term thinking, and yet these individuals made a fortune that was taxed at a lower rate and they were incentivized to take these jobs all because of these incentives, and it's actually detrimental to the productivity of the overall economy. Anyway, the book is about so much more than this one insight that just happened to jump out at me. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the real challenges that economies all around the world are facing right now and potential solutions, consider reading Good Economics for Hard Times by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo.